Okay, so this is going to be Chapter 6 homework from your My Issue page. Remember, we're going to click on the title. It's going to take us into Canvas, and we'll scroll down to our Chapter 6 homework, Problems and Application. We'll load it. And this particular set of homework problems as it's loading is revolving around market artificial price supports. So this is where in the market we reach some equilibrium level, and for whatever reason the government has determined they don't like that equilibrium quantity and price, and so they're going to impose what we call market artificial price supports. So I'm going to pull up question number 1. There's only 3 questions here. So using this diagram that you're given for the first question, the equilibrium is always where supply and demand intersect, so that would be right here at that point at $5 and quantity supply and demanded at 5. But this is where the government would say, you know what, we don't like that equilibrium point, so they can either impose what's called a price ceiling or a price floor. So price ceiling are prices that are not allowed to go above a certain amount, and a price floor is a price that's set at some amount that isn't allowed to go below. So we use the terminology binding price ceiling and binding price floor to kind of designate when these artificial price supports cause issues in the market. So in order for a price ceiling to be binding, the price ceiling has to be set below an equilibrium. So here, if the price ceiling was set at $3, the price would be allowed to be lower, but it wouldn't be allowed to go higher than 3. And our equilibrium wants us to be at 5, which is higher than 3. So we would say that would be a binding price ceiling. If, on the other hand, a price floor was set above equilibrium, so this is a price floor now, the price floors are always allowed to go higher than what it's set at, but it's not allowed to go lower. So in this case, if a price floor is set above equilibrium, which let's say it was set at $8 and the equilibrium is 5, the price floor wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't be able to go down because the floor says it must be $8 or higher. So we would call that a binding price floor. So with all of that said, I actually think you'll be fine answering this particular question here, which is in the market for cheese. And the only thing I'll just remind you of, in this case, you're going to right-click on the star, and that's what you're going to use to kind of move around and get to whatever the question is asking you. I really don't think you'll have an issue with this problem as long as you remember it's a price floor that you've been told is being put in place. So remember that would be the price floor is set at 3. So it's down here, and you have to ask yourself, is that price floor when it's set at 3 going to be binding? And then I think you should be able to answer that question with no problem. Question number 2, you know what, we haven't actually even covered enough material here, so I'm just going to tell you straight up, put false and just go on and continue on. So I'm just going to put save and continue. And then for our last question here, again, I'm just going to remind you, you're going to use your star to kind of move yourself around based on what the question is asking. And because this is supply and demand and minimum wage, I'll just remind you, this supply curve represents the supply of labor. So that would be the workers, so people willing and able to work. So what we find with the supply of labor is the lower the wage, like let's say at $1, very few people willing to work, and the higher the wage, more people are willing to work. So supply of labor are people willing to work, and the demand for labor are the workers that are being demanded by the firms. So they're willing to hire more people the lower the wage they have to pay, and hire fewer people the higher the wage. So this is a minimum wage. So what you want to kind of do in this problem is think to yourself, okay, minimum wage is even though we know our minimum wage is higher than 7, but just go with this picture. So we have this minimum wage that's been set at 7, our equilibrium is at 5. So remember, minimum wage says the wage can't go below some amount. So when you're doing this, you want to think of, is this price floor causing any sort of problem? And then I think if you think about it in that way, I really don't think you'll have any issues with this problem. The only thing I'm going to give you answers to are the elasticity of demand and supply, because we have not covered it. So I'm just going to tell you, click here, and then for the elasticity of supply, click there. But the rest of the question you should be able to do yourself. And that's it for, let me just double check. That's it for this chapter.